All right, ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to the Be Free Radio Show, Brain Food from the Heartland. As promised, and I've got to say, I'm having way too much fun off air with Daniel José Older. Here we are. Here we are.
Here we are.
Daniel, you're a blast. You're a blast.
Thank you.
Welcome. Thanks for putting up with my madness so far.
Listen, it's my pleasure. It's way more fun that way than any other way.
I appreciate that. Seriously. Tell us about yourself.
Well, I'm a writer. I love writing. I love stories, first and foremost. Stories are what is the through line for all the different work I've done, whether it was cartoons when I was a little kid, music when I was a little older. I was a paramedic for 10 years in New York City, bike messenger in San Francisco. I really lived all these different lives, but they really all come together in the form of story when I write my books. And we're here to talk about Last Canto of the Dead, which I'll let you go.
And I want to get into that, but being a paramedic, well, I don't even want to say I can't imagine. Of course I can't. So what was that like for you?
It was incredible. It was life-changing. It made me the man I am. I'm really glad I did it, and I'm really glad I'm done. I did it for 10 years. It was a really part of my life. And I knew I wanted to be a writer that whole time. Most of my writing was going into music during that period. But I always knew that I would be telling stories. And when you're a medic, you don't have the luxury of just watching things happen. And I think artists get caught up in that idea that we can be outside something and just kind of watch it and then record it and then tell the world. But we're always a part of the story. And I knew that. But I knew that being a medic would really make that true in a visceral way. Literally, you're elbow deep in other people's worst day of their life, if not the last day of their life. And so you have to take part. You are bound by duty to do whatever you can to help them survive whatever they're going through. And as a storyteller, I knew that was going to be really important. I didn't just want to be someone on the sidelines.
Wow, there's so many things I'd love to talk with you about with that, and being a storyteller and how it came to you. You said when you were young and music. Can you tell us just a little bit more about the development?
Yeah, I think stories are just really like the fabric of life, like the through line of life, everywhere, whoever you are. They're always around us. And when we're kids, it's often shows and movies and everything else, or music. But I think it's also the stories we learn from our families, and the stories that we hear growing up. I grew up in a Cuban and Jewish household. So
go ahead.
No, it's just it's a mix. There's a lot of stories there, period. Just saying that, there's just people got stories, we got stories. And so hearing about Cuba, hearing about, Judaism and the folklores and the legends and the everything, that's just always been a part of, I think all of us come from that on some level, whether we're from that type of culture or not, it's always around us. And you can imagine paramedics are some good storytellers. So you're living stories on the one hand, but you're hearing stories from your coworkers on the other hand, and you're learning about how we tell stories, as you're moving through that.
Like I say, I can't imagine, which is really understated, but to go through that, to have that kind of work day, if you will, and either, saving a life, the spectrum of what you would see, and then going home.
Here's what I learned. Here's something that people don't know about this job, because I would always get that question at parties, like, "Oh, wow, you're a medic." First they would say, "You must see some crazy stuff," and then they would say, "How do you sleep at night?" I'd be like, I sleep great. I save people's lives. That's a great job. Yeah. But the key to that, the misunderstanding comes with the word "see," right? And that's what I was sort of alluding to before, is that you can't just see something. And if I were, even during my period as a medic, but certainly today, if I were to walk out the door and someone get hit by a car in front of me and there was nothing I could do except see it, that would be enormously traumatizing. That's a horrible thing. But the second that you jump into action and do something to help another person, the second that you fulfill your calling, so to speak, or walk within your destiny, do your job, you have one job, right? The second that you take part, that trauma is cleansed from you because you are an active participant in the situation. And that's what people don't know, because most of the time they see it on TV or they see it happen, can't do anything about it. But when you're a medic, your job is to do something about it. And that's a transformative experience. So you're not having the same experience as someone that just bears witness.
Storytelling as a child, what we can, again, with that Cuban Jewish background,
yeah, it was everywhere. But like many kids, I think my first experience of storytelling was with action figures, which is fan fiction to say, to really get into it. And it was Han Solo and Luke Skywalker and the Ewoks and everybody else. I was a Return of the Jedi era kid. And that, that's how you learn how to tell stories. You have these little plastic guys that barely move their arms up and down, and then you run with it.
I've got some questions written down.
You all over the map. I'm sorry.
No, please don't be sorry. It's fascinating because again, what I love to do on the show is I don't like, I shouldn't say criticize other. If you're going like, so in chapter 1, you said this, chapter 2, this happens. We're not doing the book, especially in a brief period of time. But for me, the joy of getting to know who wrote the book.
Yeah, totally.
It's fascinating. And the more I learn about you, I'm sure it's intriguing for people. It's like, I got to read this. I got to read this. When you wrote last Canto of the Dead, Daniel, what was that? I almost hate the overused expression tipping point, where you said, I've got to continue the series. I've got to tell me.
Right. Well, let me give you the breakdown of the original book. Right. So Ballad and Dagger came out last year. It's the first book in the Outlaw Saints series. It's about 16-year-old piano prodigy Mateo Matisse, who has to tap into his newfound healing power when this ancient evil arises in his community that's tied back to the shadowy history of their magical island. And the girl he has a crush on murders someone right in front of his face. And that's what sets off this journey, right? All these different elements of healing, of magic, of music and culture and love. And so all those things are in book 1. It's a love story, and it's about this island that sank right after Mateo was born. So book 2, half of it takes place on that magical island, both in the history and the present. And it's Chela, the love interest, on the island, fighting the initial battles of this huge war to retake the island, and Mateo back in Brooklyn trying to get his community together because it's falling apart, and trying to still learn what it's like to be a normal teenager who is blessed with the powers of a god.
Wow. Yeah, your creativity just blows my mind, and I loved how you had the bat mitzvah in as part of it.
Oh, thank you.
So it begs the question. I'm sure there were some, if we had more time, some foods, some of the combinations of foods of the Cuban and Jewish foods.
Oh, of course. Yeah, we would have Passover with rice and beans. Like, absolutely. It was great. It's so wonderful that we still do.
Well, yeah. Oh, I love that. I love that. Right. You should write I'm saying you should write a song, Rice and Beans for Passover. Rice and Beans at our Passover Seder.
Yes.
If I was creative, I would give it a shot. But again, we've got links up to your website, DanielJoseOlder.net. DanielJoseOlder.net, social media, etc. And now available the last Canto of the Dead. YA, one of the things that is interesting to me, Daniel, is I almost hate when these words come out of my mouth, but in total honesty, or what do they call it today? Not well, in total honesty, that when I first was pitched a novel, I was kind of a fluke in radio, wasn't trained, just kind of started. I was asked to do it almost 25 years ago. And I started to find, so that there were publicists out there. I didn't have to go out and, I search for the author, et cetera. And then I got pitched a novel. And again, this rings terribly arrogant in my head. What am I going to ask them? Tell me about the story you made up. So I'll say I was naive, I was young, whatever. I was ignorant is the truth. And then I realized you create worlds. You actually create worlds, and I've become more and more attracted. And then YA, learning about YA. Again, I don't want to say resistant, reluctant. It was a publicist I'd worked with for years. So, okay, YA, that's cool. Let's give it a shot. And I heard from so many people in the audience that they love reading YA, that sitting down with a 300-page book of adult fiction may not be their thing. The other thing I learned is when parents read with their kids, YA. I had one dad write to me, he said, I'm embarrassed to say, but I had to pull the book out to find out what was happening next after my daughter went to sleep. So
I love that. There shouldn't be any embarrassment around that. That's so beautiful.
I agree with you. Well, he felt violating. I don't know that he read ahead and he knew it was going to happen. I don't know. I can't remember the whole email. But the reality is, and I'm a big advocate for reading, big advocate for our libraries, reading, whatever age, reading. And if it's YA for adults, beautiful because the
Yes.
stories are there.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Everything you just said. And I mean, I think what you're speaking to too is the phenomenon that caught a lot of people off guard, including I think the publishing industry, which is that a lot of the readers of young adult books are fully grown adults,
Yeah.
old adults. And that's
Old people.
totally okay. You know, like there shouldn't be, like I said, there shouldn't be any shame around that. It's like a good story is a good story.
It's a good,
And on top of that, like all of us have been young adults at one time or another, except people who aren't there yet. We have all had those experiences of being a teenager, adolescence, all of the chaos and the crises that involves. So of course it speaks to us. And then the last thing I'll say is this: as a writer of young adult fiction, who was once a young adult myself too, you know, being a young person so much is, especially an adolescent, it's about change. It's about crisis. Crisis in the ancient sense of it, not just something bad that happens, but a turning point. And that's so powerful because young people especially are constantly facing down turning points, crossroads. You know, they're always living through change, becoming who they're going to be a little bit every single day. And sometimes that happens because of who you want to ask out. Sometimes it happens because of decisions about where you're going to go to college or if you're going to go to college. And sometimes it's because you're fighting an ancient evil that's trying to destroy your community, you know? And that's why YA literature is so powerful and so potent, is that books in general across the board, no matter who they're for, are about change. They're always about crisis. They're always about what changed in the course of this story, globally, locally, and within our hearts. And I think that speaks to all of us.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful, Daniel José Older, because when you say that and you think about that, that it is, and it's helpful for people. It's helpful for people.
I mean, it's helpful for me. I'm 43 and I'm still, you know, changing all the time and growing.
You're still, forgive me, you're a young adult in my book.
I'll take it. I'm not going to argue with you. I'm proud to be whatever kind of adult I am. I'm definitely that. And like you well know, sir, like everything is always changing, right? And I think there's a myth when you're a child that like you reach a certain point and everything stops, right? You're just like, all right. And then you're adult and then you're old or whatever. Like you don't get it, that you're every day evolving, every day changing. And there are crises and turning points every day. And that's a beautiful thing. That's evolution, that's growth. But it is still scary. Even when you're 43, all that change can still be scary. And that's why we need heroes to look to say, this is how you confront change, not by pretending that you're fine and it doesn't affect you, but by actually facing it, looking it in the face and dealing with it head on.
I love how philosophical you are about it. And I agree with you. I agree with you 100%. It's like, even at my ripe age of 70, I still love when it's like, wow, I never thought about it like that. I still love that. You know, some people get a little more curmudgeonly. I've got my curmudgeonly areas, believe me. I've got my curmudgeonly areas, but I love that experience. And one thing is, again, reading and reading whatever is going to spark that.
Absolutely.
And that should drive you. Go ahead.
No, James Baldwin has this great quote that I'm going to butcher trying to paraphrase it, but it's like, you know, you think you're all alone with your pain in the world, and then you open a book. And that right there is everything, you know, like it's so true. And I think particularly young people are feeling a lot of the first time. It might be true love. It might be a different kind of fear that you haven't known. You know, it might be the anxiety of what's ahead. But all of those things, like they feel overwhelming because you've never felt them before. And then you open a book and you realize like people have been feeling these things since the dawn of feeling things. And that makes you less alone. And they might be people who are totally different from you. And they might be magical people, you know, but somehow there's this connection and that feels true. And it reminds you that you're not on your own. And that's so important.
That is so important. The successes that you've had, many books. The new book, of course, now available everywhere. What's the date today?
Actually, tomorrow.
Tomorrow, the 16th. See, and here's where I could say, well, I'm an old guy, you know, I wasn't sure what the date was.
I'll give it to you.
Thank you. Tomorrow. I don't like to say it's an excuse, an explanation.
But look, you can order it today, and that's a pre-order, which we love.
Yeah, and tomorrow's the official release date of Last Canto of the Dead and Outlaw Saints novel. The tremendous successes, New York Times bestselling author, and you're, again, I love your warmth and the way you are, your vibe. I guess that's what people will call it. With all the successes you've had, what is that like for you? I mean, New York Times best-selling author.
Right. Yeah,
Wow.
that's a great question. I love that you phrased it that way, because I don't think it's amazing, obviously, but I don't think I would even say we collectively stop enough to really like sit in that, because it's always like the next thing, or like I have a toddler right now, so now everything is like him, right? Like
How old?
just making sure he's 19 months.
Oh,
Yeah, so he's a year and a half, and it's incredible, right? It's life-changing. All of these things are happening at once, and it's so important, and I think a challenge to all of us to just sit and be in that, to your point, exist in the place of those successes without being so encumbered by like, well, what's going to happen next? What's next? Are we going to get this? Are we going to do that? Because you do get caught up in that. It is a form of rat race, even in this very creative industry that I'm in. It can be very just demanding in your headspace. And I'm doing what I love the most in the world, which is telling stories. And I've always said to myself, or very early on when I was setting out to be a writer, I asked myself, what does success mean? I think it's an important question that we all have to ask ourselves, whatever industry we're in, but especially in writing or in the creative world, where like there's no one path. There is no right way. There is no apprenticeship even. You have to, my favorite quote in the world says, caminante no hay camino, hace camino andar, which is to walker, there is no path. You make the road by walking it. Antonio Machado. It's a beautiful poem. And that's it. Like, especially in creativity, you have to make your own path by walking that path. And if you don't know what success looks like for yourself, you will run right past it thinking that you're supposed to be living Stephen King's life and be miserable because you're not, when the truth is you've already made it, so to speak. And so, in my mind, like, I've made it and I've done so many of the things I've always wanted to do, and there's still more I want to do, but I love, I think it's so important to just sit in what I've done.
it's beautiful. I've got to find that poem. Is the title of it Walk Where There Is No
The title of it is Make the Road by Walking. It's online. You can find it. It's really like the best poem in the world. I come back to it all the time when people ask me writing advice or life advice, because that's it right there. You make that road by walking. There is no path. And when there is no path, you actually cannot be lost. It's impossible to be lost if there isn't a path. So you have to keep going and make it yourself.
I love how philosophical you are, and it's a beautiful philosophy. And I know you got to split in a minute. The characters, developing the characters. I had a novelist many years ago say, sometimes when I'm writing, a character will say, well, I wouldn't do that. And I thought about it. I don't have that talent, that skill, that creativity. What is it like for you when creating characters, which you do so beautifully?
It's fun. Like, it's really fun. It's challenging. I think there's a thing where there's like a breaking point sometimes where you're thinking through, you have this character and the bare bones of them. You might know a detail here, a detail there, but they're not quite alive yet. And then something will click. And sometimes it's very surface, like how do they dress? Which actually is a very, deep and real question, but, or it might be, what kind of pet do they have? Whatever it is. And something about that takes you over the edge. And then you're like, I got it. I know who you are and I can write you. And then the other thing I'll say to that, which is that I don't think we talk about it enough. I always tell my writing students, it's really important to take an acting class as a writer. A lot of people become writers because they don't want to be on stage and talk to people. But the truth is that actors have to live and embody a character in a way that writers are not taught to do, which is to say, what writers tend to do is be like, well, what would this person do in this situation? You can't do that. You have to say, what am I going to do in this situation as I live it and breathe it? Because you have to embody that character. It's not enough to intellectually try to conceptualize what they would do. You have to live them. And that's how you avoid making total missteps about what a character would do, is that you embody them. And that doesn't mean you have to necessarily act them out, but it does mean that you have to have an understanding of what it means to live in the skin of a character, rather than just kind of like try to, figure it out in your head.
I love that. Not that you're certainly busy and you're certainly working on something all the time, but wow, a nonfiction book about your philosophies, about an experience. I just got to say, I'd be pre-ordering.
That's, I'm gonna think on that. I like that.
Before I get too much older, at 70.
All right, I'll hurry up. Jeez.
But I know you got to split. I would love to continue talking with you. Again, you can pre-order. The release date, the pub date is tomorrow for the book Last Canto of the Dead. And you can go. I'm sorry.
I lost audio again. Sorry. Okay, now
Are we good? It'll be available as of tomorrow, everywhere and everywhere online. You can pre-order it. Certainly. But again, you go to Daniel Jose Older, OLDER.com. We've got all those.
.net.
So,
.net.
.net. I'm sorry.
That's all right. And let me shout out the fact that there are writing classes on the website. So I have like video classes up about writing. You can find all my books, and you can find my blog from when I was a paramedic.
Oh, cool. At the website. Okay. That's excellent. DanielleJoseOlder.net. See, I'm an old guy. There I go. No, I screwed up. Listen, I've loved this, and I hope we can do it again. You're
absolutely. We have
Thank
to.
you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank
Wonderful.
you,
Ladies and gentlemen, you've got to order the book. What an incredible human being, though.